Hey everybody, welcome to the Lion's Den. Obviously the big cat is out of the den today, and I'm Bill Rossell, Vice President Client Relations with One SEO. And I got to tell you, I'm super pumped today to be able to have Keith Mercurio in the den with me to kind of talk about a bunch of different stuff. And for those that don't know who Keith is out there, he is a plumber, a New England sports fan, head of training formerly of Nexstar. He's trained over 20,000 owners, GMs, frontline workers. He's a motivational speaker and a thought leader in the space. And so I want to welcome you to the den.
Glad to be here. Thank you for so quickly catching yourself that I am by no means a New York sports fan.
I know. I slipped.
It was potentially an egregious error there. So
that's all right. We know that you're a TB12 fan, which is going to go real well with the big cat.
Yeah, that's a painful revelation over the past. I said that as a Boston boy, I was so happy to have, I said COVID was like a welcome, quarantine was a welcome reprise from the pain of Tom Brady leaving the New England Patriots. So it was, it's been a tough stretch here for the Boston fans.
So, obviously I did a high level overview, but tell us a little bit about your journey in the space, Keith, as far as, kind of what has transitioned over, from the time you went to school and how you are where you are today.
Yeah. Very, for the sake of doing so and expediting it, but happy to live anywhere you want. I went to college to play baseball, Division II program, got hurt, but also at the same time, I was like, never a great student. I really had to kind of cheat my way through school to even survive, and, smart enough kid, but just couldn't handle the workload, especially once college kind of continued on. So I dropped out of school and went to work for my next door neighbor, Tim Flynn. Tim Flynn and Gino Cataldo owned Winters Plumbing back in, at the time, Belmont, and then eventually Cambridge, Mass. So I spent 8 years with them, first as a plumber, and then developing into HVAC sales and working in that realm, and then as the trainer for their organization. And it was around that time that we joined Nexstar. And the moment that I saw what Nexstar was doing, I saw Dave Bodick was the first trainer I ever saw at Nexstar, along with Bob Hamilton and Lewis Williams, and three people that are still mentors and friends to me. But as soon as I saw what they were doing, I said, that's it. That's what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so after leaving Winters, Nexstar actually reached out to me, and I became their first full-time trainer. And over the next 8 years, we would grow that department. I want to say there's 6 or 7 full-time trainers on staff there now. Went from a little under $1 million in revenue and training annually to about $6.5 million, I think, in my last year there as director, and spent 8 years with them as well. And was just absolutely, just the greatest training organization on earth. Amazing people, amazing members. It was and always will be a part of my heart. Just one of my great privileges. But then last year in July, I decided to step out on my own and joined forces with Radiant Plumbing down in Austin, Texas. And
transparency, they are a client of One SEO, but
for sure.
Transparency.
Well, yeah, and as far as transparency goes, if you're looking for any sort of a testimonial, Radiant was on. We did 20. I joined a ridiculously talented team there, so like ridiculously talented. They were already a $20 million organization, but so far this year we're on pace to do close to $40 million in revenue. So been a really amazing journey, and so I work with them, and I'm also a consultant to Service Titan, which I'm sure a ton of your viewers are aware of. And I work with their leadership team as well as their inside of their training department with enablement. And so that's kind of where I'm at, and just continuing to launch my own endeavors and work with these amazing partners. But Radiant has been really a special one.
As it applies to like the length of time that, you were at Nexstar, what was it, 10, 12 years?
No, just 8 years. 8 years at Nexstar.
Okay,
yeah.
8 years. One of the biggest challenges anybody faces out there is that when you perform at a high level for a very long time, the ability to bring it every day, day in and day out is one of the challenges that we all face out there. And sometimes people can get into those ebbs and flows where they're not bringing it. But when you're in a training environment, you have to bring it every day, whether it be on the motivational speaker side, whether it's being on the training side. What made you bring it every day as it applies to the Nexstar environment?
It's actually a really easy answer for me, and it was like tremendous crippling insecurity. So I was terrified of ever letting down the audience at any point in time. I was so honored to get to be a part of that team. It was my dream to get to work there. And one of my very first resolutions, the very first business planning meeting I was part of, our annual planning, I remember it fondly. I wrote that I would not only be enough, but I would actually advance the quality of what Nexstar was delivering. And I did maintain that commitment throughout, but it was fear-based. Like I just was always, obsessed with making sure that I performed at the level that was worthy of that organization's name, of their audience. And, when I was doing about 40 to 45 trainings per year, so 40 to 45 weeks traveling on the road, 3-day trainings, 8 to 12 hours a day. And, 80+% of the people in that room didn't want to be there, right? They were getting sent to the trainings. They were, their managers were sending them off, whatever else. Not talking about the owners and the managers, but the technicians and the frontline staff. And so there's just this immense sense of like, this has to be so extraordinary that every one of these men and women walk out of here saying, hey, that was worth 3 days of my life to be there. And so that was my motivation.
That's pretty powerful. One of the things that I kind of like to do today is really kind of segment down into, a couple of different categories that I think would be beneficial for our listeners to kind of understand a little bit about your philosophy and theory and background on. And it's really about leadership development and then training and development in a whole and how it affects culture. And then last but not least, your own personal development, because I think it's very, very important that you have to break down those different aspects to make a great company. And, in 20 years that I've been in business, working in marketing and advertising, the one thing that I've seen as a consistency, Keith, is that great businesses like a Radiant, like a Hutchinson, like an Arlinghouse, you can go on and on through the entire, community, is that they all have great leaders in their company. And as a leadership coach, what characteristics of great leadership versus poor leadership have you seen over the last several years?
The primary characteristic in great leadership that I see is a commitment to personal growth. So, John Maxwell talks about a version of this. He calls it the law of the lid. But what most people, what you'll see is high performers, business owners, high-level managers, their mentality is that it's their job to grow their people up to them, right? So like their job is to grow their people up to them. And not only is this sort of a condescending way to look at, your team beneath you, right? And you hear this language all the time, my team under me, the people beneath me, the people that work for me. You hear this type of language, and these are strong indicators that you've got somebody with this mentality. They're trying to build people up to that level. Well, that's not how growth works. People will only grow at the rate at which we grow. They will never grow at the height that we've grown, whatever that even means. So most leaders are trying to teach a lesson, and they want their people to get it or to buy in. Great leaders are learning lessons, and they're bringing their team along that journey with them. And so instead of creating buy-in to what I've got, we're both invested in where we're going. And that's a really critical distinction. And it's the hallmark of what's a compliance-based leader versus a leader that's actually creating discretionary effort where people can see their own future and want to be a part of what they're up to.
Ownership has a lot of different levels through an organization. It's obviously the case. If a company's successful or a company is struggling, is it always on the leadership where, as if in a situation where it might be struggling, one of the stories we constantly hear is, I can't find the right people. Where does it kind of go in that direction?
So, the short answer, yes, it's always on the leadership. Not that there aren't other reasons why, but look, if I say I can't find good people, there are no good people out there, right? That might be true. And two things are happening. One, if that is true, then I'm effed, right? There's nothing I can do with that.
Right.
Then this is just it. So that mindset alone is a mindset that doesn't serve. So if you're going to commit to that truth, right, then you've already created a ceiling as far as where you can go. So fine. And I let people keep that truth if they want it. I just challenge them to say, and if that is true, then you got nowhere to go with this. This is your organization. This is all it'll ever be. And so congratulations. Like, you get your truth, but you also get this result with that truth. Comparatively, you know, when we shift our mindset out of that, we move out of that, because once we've decided that's our truth, now we got confirmation bias going in the non-conscious, and now we're supporting, finding evidence to support that belief. And so all I ever ask people to do is look at their beliefs and ask, do they serve them and do they honor them? And inside of that space, that belief clearly doesn't serve the organization, you, the people out there. So shift the belief. Shift the belief to the assumption that there are incredible people out there. How do I go find them? And now you're commanding your brain, you're commanding your organization, you're creating a culture that says, we're going to go do this. And I mean, I have worked with businesses that are literally, you know, within 1 mile of each other in a city, where I've watched one business grow, you know, 40 times. The other business remains stagnant for 6-7 year stretches. And the stagnant business is saying, we can't find good people, while this business a mile away is growing at 40 times. And I'm not making that up at all. That's an actual case.
I understand that. I understand that.
Yeah. So, I mean, whether or not it's true, it's just, it's not a worthwhile truth. So just get out of it, and you got to look at yourself.
So generally speaking, you know, in the trades, you have really great technicians, okay, that necessarily weren't trained to be really great leaders, okay? And that's where having a leadership coach to work with their team comes into play. What does a company look like to have a leadership coach work with their team?
Well, there's, you know, regardless of whether it's the trades, there's very few people have ever been trained in leadership. We have maybe some coaches who inspired us, maybe a good boss along the way. All anybody's doing is modeling behaviors they've seen. That, you know, people aren't coming up with their own stuff. You know, we're always in modeling form. So the idea that any organization would go without leadership training is a really bizarre concept. You know, I mean, it's, and honestly, Bill, this was like a huge transition for me, because I was training technicians, frontline staff, and I would visit companies 2, 3, 4 times a year. And it was great. And their team members would come out and they'd be transformed and alive and inspired and ready to go. And then they were returning to leadership teams that had that previous model, that previous mentality that I'd referenced, right? Where they were like, hey, you know, they need to buy in, they need to get, and none of these leadership teams were pursuing training.
Was the leadership development program at Nexstar one of the first or one of the last that you put into the program?
Great question. It was one of the last, and that's when that's exactly where it was born from. After years and years, I would watch these guys go back into leadership teams that didn't have an environment and a culture to support the growth they had been doing. And they would return back to some version of their previous performance. And so then the leadership would say, we got to train our guys up again. And it's like, no, you need to get trained up. Like, enough of training your people, like, get to work on yourselves. And so that was, you know, the team at Nexstar, we had that conversation. We got super clear. And this is what we were watching, Bill. We had something like 70% of our members were engaged in our training for technicians, and like 20% were doing managerial training. And so that's when we rebooted the whole thing. And I said, I'm done. And I literally gave away my entire book of training to the other trainers. And I said, I am only training advanced and leadership programs from here on. And I did that for the last couple of years of my time there.
So obviously the numbers probably shift from the 20% on the leadership side that you had. And they came to those classes, you increased to whatever those particular numbers would be. But one of the challenges is that I think in any training is people go off, they do the training, but then they don't come back and really work on the things that they were educated on. So what are the top kind of 3 areas that you think that leaders should be focusing on to work on becoming a better leader?
So this ties back actually nicely to the question I never did fully answer for you about like a leadership coach. And so, for example, that's one of the critical roles, that I play with Radiant. And when I work with in leadership coaching we're creating a repetitive, ongoing rhythm of coaching and development. So weekly or every other week, one-on-ones, things like this are critical. So most businesses, that's where it falls apart right there, is that team members come back and they're not even holding weekly performance coaching conversations with their team members. And, at some level, the leadership and the owners need to be having those conversations with someone else. And that's like the role that I play. But the number one thing in an organization is that there has to be one-on-ones. That's the most important, consistent business rhythm for sake of performance. Number one. And nobody even really knows what a good one-on-one looks like, but I'll tell you that a bad one-on-one is still better than no one-on-one.
Right.
All right. So weekly one-on-ones with every single member of the team. And I'm sure there are people out there hearing this going, what do you even talk about? I get it. And this is where you've really got to develop. I promise you, our one-on-ones on a weekly basis, we have hour-long one-on-ones. Almost none of them even finish on time. We have to work to bring them in under an hour. That's how much we have to talk about from a personal and growth development standpoint.
Right.
So that's, and we're not just talking about, we barely talk about, random stuff. I mean, these are serious meetings. The second thing that they have to have is weekly training. So skills-focused training, developing customer service skills, personal development skills, leadership skills, whatever that looks like. Once a week, that needs to be occurring. And then from an ongoing training standpoint, annual multi-day immersion training whenever we're able to actually be in person again, or, committing to some kind of virtual training program where people are getting re-immersed. And I'll just finish by saying this. Those big training programs, what happens is they transform your belief, which is the foundation for all behavior. So they transform belief, instill a behavior. But then ongoing training and coaching is critical for reinforcing the behavior to reinforce the belief. And if that falls off, then the belief system falls back apart. And now we got to relearn everything the next time we go.
You and I spoke via text, and I was saying a little bit about how I rely on, for me, I rely heavily on Blanchard's situational leadership to be able to look at commitment and competency with any of the tasks that hands at somebody is dealing with, so that I can address that at whatever their particular developmental level is. And it works really well for me. Might not work well for others, but when you find a system that works well for you, you take it and run with it, and you're open to new ideas. What are some of the common trends or leadership styles that you come across that you have seen to be believed are good leadership, but are actually kind of counterproductive?
Okay. You threw me a curveball at the end there. So counterproductive leadership styles. Okay. Number one on the list is power-based leadership. So authority-based leadership, compliance-based leadership, people need to do what they're told to do. Anything like that, when we're leading from a place of, fear, using so fear and power-based mentalities, what that does is it drives your staff into survival mode. And people are only functioning at a baseline when they're in survival mode. And so constant pressure and fear is exhausting. It wears people out, and it's what actually limits performance. And of course, leaders with that mentality think they need to exert more pressure in order to get that performance raised and still continue to create the counterculture. And so that's where you'll also see really high turnover rates or really low employee engagement. All right. So that style is a disaster. And then the other most common style that we see is competitive-based mentality. So wanting to create competitions among your team, putting, prizes and trophies. And you see this a lot in the trades, where they'll kind of create these very kind of hyper masculine competitions about you get the championship weight belt if you're the top sales guy, or this trophy or whatever. And you kind of create a lot of those. And, you know, the reality is that within those competitions, only about 20% of your players are actually competing. Those are your top guys who are always
Not because the same top guys keep winning over and over and over again.
Then you've got
encouragement.
Yeah, then you've got like the middle of the pack that maybe they might get lucky, so they go for it for a little bit, but then they kind of just fall back in the middle of the pack. And typically they kind of resent the top players. And they'll usually say things like, well, that's because they get better calls, or they get better, you know, leads, or they get better opportunities. And then you've got like your bottom 20% that absolutely just hate their lives, you know, inside of that competitive model. But here's the thing. Business owners, leaders, these guys, these women, top performers. So they like competition. So what do? We use what we like to try to motivate others. In leadership, it's that what you want is the least important thing. What works is what's most important. And again, confirmation bias is going to tell us, oh, our competitions work. We have this. No, they don't. Your top guys, you can still figure out ways to reward your top players. You can still acknowledge them, but think about creating team competitions. Think about creating competitions for most improved. Think about collaborative efforts, about training each other and working together. That's the stuff that actually drives the team. That's why you see a team like Radiant where they're going to go from 20 to 40 million in a year, because they're not competing against each other.
You know, we've been discussing different aspects of team, leadership, okay? But, and even in the case at Radiant, okay, there are a lot of leaders, but they effectively have to operate as a team, okay? What do you think, from your perspective, makes an effective leadership team operate effectively?
Yeah. Trust. And that's a really quick answer that requires a lot of understanding, but the competitive aspect is what kicks in again. So here's what happens. Teams, most leadership teams that would be watching this probably think that they trust each other. They probably think that they have, every time I do this exercise with an organization, they think they have a high level of trust, or each individual thinks they're trusting, but no one else is trusting, or something like that. But then you ask them this question. You say this is the litmus test for finding out if your team, if you've got a team-oriented team. You say, would you rather go into your monthly meeting knowing that your department hit its goal while the other departments missed, or all the other departments hit their goal while your department missed? And anybody with honest, you know, like, you're going to find that the majority of your leaders who are being honest in that moment would say, I'd rather go in knowing I hit my numbers. And this is the competitive mentality where there's nothing wrong with wanting to perform at a great level. Of course I want to hit my numbers. But if I'm genuinely looking at team performance, the only way a team wins is if we all win. And what happens inside of a leadership team is that the team members don't actually trust that they can make mistakes and still be in an elevated status. And so they only speak up when they think they have a winning idea. They only contribute in areas where they think they're going to be heard. You'll have some people dominate other people. You'll have quiet leaders shrink away because their ideas get squashed by vocal leaders. You have CEOs who think that their ideas are the preeminent ones and they need to get everyone bought into them. And this is the competitive environment that creates a really low performing team compared to what it could be when you really do develop that trust. And that trust says, I can be vulnerable, I can make mistakes, I can put really bad ideas out there, know that I'm still going to have a seat at this table tomorrow. I'm still going to be respected. I'm still going to be worthwhile on this team and seen that way. And I'm telling you, that takes an immense amount of work to create that level of leadership.
Well, you know, I know we've been talking a lot about leadership, but I kind of like to pivot the conversation to how, you know, business in general, whether it be within the trades, whether it be, you know, small to medium-sized businesses in general, you know, ongoing training, it's really critical to success. You know, I'd like our listeners really to be able to hear your thoughts on why training and development is so critical, not only to service-based business, but any business. And if I could just push back a little bit on this one before you give me the answers, how do you see training affecting culture and having a well-run training program adding to the culture of that company?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll actually give you an example of it with probably one of my favorite case studies, which was the team at Any Hour in Utah. And, they're really, really kind of an aspirational organization inside the trades. And, what I watched with them, they had such a unique take on training. They actually considered training to be a retention-based investment. And so, the way you go about training is critical as far as how what sort of an environment you create around it. And so I learned this from them and then adopted it and adapted it and applied it in countless organizations since. But what is so important is that instead of making people go to training needs to be something that you earn the right to go to. And so what I learned from them and what we do now is team members have to apply for training. They have to prove that they're worthy of the investment in training. They have to, whether it's write essays or create a case around it. They have to fill out questionnaires. They have to commit to what they're going in to learn and what they're going to do with the information. And all of a sudden, when we create scarcity around training, where you have to earn your way in, and true scarcity, where you have to earn your way in, suddenly it becomes very appealing. But here's the most important thing. It has to be extraordinary training. Because if the training's bad, then nobody's going to want to go to it. So the training has to be extraordinary. And the moment the training's extraordinary and it's scarce, people are going to want it.
Because you see that commitment that they're making to invest in themselves, to invest in your company and the dollars you're spending, which will put you 10 times further in the long run.
That's right. And within that, from a cultural standpoint, what I did for years was I would try to sell people on this concept of what was in it for them, why they should be interested in training, what they're going to get out of it and everything else. And I was selling them. And as a result, I was constantly having to drag people along. And I think the phrase, what's in it for me, is among the most toxic phrases inside of a business that we can repeat. And when we find ourselves thinking about trying to sell people on this, then we're creating a really selfish culture. And so instead, when we talk about training, we're going to talk about what you're going to do with it. Who are you going to commit to making better as a result of it? How are you going to add value to the organization because of this training? How are you going to add value to the lives of the people around you because you're getting exposed to this? And we're going to talk about what you're going to do from a contributory standpoint, not what you're going to gain from it. The gain is only available through your contribution. And so that's culturally, that's a major transition inside of the training mentality.
So knowing that businesses are making a decision to invest in their employees, whether it be digitally speaking here, sending somebody off to one of the Google classes, or sending, an HVAC, sending them off to Nexstar or any of the other third-party, coaching opportunities out there. Based on your experience, what would you say some of the biggest challenges that those companies make in the training and development when they send people off?
What are the biggest challenges that they face sending people off?
Yeah.
So the biggest, sort of common error is to send people off without preparing them. So without getting that commitment to what they're going to do inside of that training, sending them off without managers, without team members alongside them, so that their support and it becomes just like, just a fun trip instead of something where they're prepared to take it seriously. And then not having a plan for coaching them when they get back. So, if that manager doesn't go learn the content, isn't an absolute master in the information, isn't totally committed and invested to the growth of his or her team members, then they're going to once again come back and they're going to be kind of in a wasteland. So this idea that training is to be done by someone else, you send somebody to training and they're trained, these are really empty concepts, and they lead to a lot of bad money being spent. And, I have consistently, I can say this with absolute transparency. I've turned away probably in my career now, millions of dollars worth of training because the organization was not in the space that it needed to be for that training to really have value. And, you know, when I say turned it away, I'm sure that we got it back on the other end when they came back around out of respect for the fact that we didn't take their money and I didn't take their money when they weren't going to get the return that they were prepared for. But, you know, that's a tough conversation, and you got to really look at yourself to have that conversation. Am I genuinely serving this customer by taking their training investment when I know that they're not in a position to support it? And so, you know, people are very hasty to want to get their team members trained. And this is where, at this point in my career, I will only work with an organization if the leadership is prepared to do the training with me first.
Very cool. Very cool. You know, I saw a quote the other day by Simon Sinek that said, you know, that as a manager, you're not going to grow the company. Your responsibility is that you are going to grow the people that grow the company. And we get calls and inquiries from all kinds of small to medium-sized businesses that are getting started, whether they be a 3, a 4, a 5-man company. What would be your advice to those where they're trying to balance that I can't do all of these things, but I know I need to do some of these things? What would be the advice you'd give them to help continue to grow in that people development aspect?
So number one is that I disagree with Simon Sinek. And I disagree with him in this regard. When you start talking about growing other people, that puts the focus away from yourself. You have to grow yourself. You have to be deeply invested in your own personal growth, your own leadership capacity, your own ongoing capacity to produce more, to become a higher performer, to become more empathetic, to become a better listener. This is you, the leader. That's it. It starts, ends, stops there. Don't even think about having the arrogance to try to grow other people if you're not in a continuous growth path yourself. And growth doesn't mean success, by the way. Growth means learning something today that you didn't know yesterday. Growth means asking every day, what was I wrong about yesterday? You know, that's what real growth looks like. And then you share that, and that's what people learn from. So you have to create the space for growth as a leader. And then secondarily to that is, you know, I'll give you a more practical answer to it. That's sort of the philosophical answer. The practical answer is to say, when people are overwhelmed, it's almost always because they're not actually instituting regular patterns in their work. Like, for example, when I talk to business owners and managers about establishing one-on-ones, they say, I'm too busy for one-on-ones. And what I share back with them is the reason you're too busy for one-on-ones is because you're not having one-on-ones. Okay. So these are, because what we end up doing is we're constantly handling what's in front of us. You know, I just read a study that came out of some TED articles about like the highest performers and people that are incredibly productive with their time management. They ask themselves a question. So, you know, for example, Bill, do you give yourself like a daily checklist? Do you have some version of a checklist or like a to-do list, some version of that?
Yes.
All right. And so I'll ask you, and I'm open to you having any answer here, but what typically causes you to prioritize your checklist? How do you prioritize? What's the question you ask yourself?
What's most important to me in that day?
Perfect. And that's how the majority of us would look at a checklist and would say, what's the most important thing for me today? But what they discovered was that these supreme performers, these real high producers, what they ask themselves is, what do I need to do today that will make tomorrow better? And so here's a great example. If on your checklist you had, you know, I got to get this meeting done, I got to get my budget in, I got to get, you know, this project off and this bid done. And somewhere at the bottom it said I got to set up, you know, online bill pay, right?
Right.
Well, guess what? Online bill pay is going to be able to get pushed off every single day. But a top performer, their mindset, they say, yeah, but when I calculate how much time I spend in a month paying bills, I realize that if I spent 30 minutes today on online bill pay, I'd actually have more time in the month to be able to do other things. And so top performers are looking at their list every day saying, what are the things that I can do that are going to have the most significant impact to free up additional time so I can become more productive with that time?
Because it's
And
the
so,
only thing you can't get back is that time.
yeah. And so instead of constantly prioritizing, what do I need to do today? We say, what do I need to do today in order to make tomorrow a more productive day? And the day after that, and the month after that, and the year after that. And that's where these personal development items, where establishing your one-on-ones, creating a calendar, sitting down, and if you're typing up a new bid every single time and you're writing up a new email, take an hour to write and craft 3 separate templates that you can draw from. This is the stuff that's going to save your time.
Absolutely. One of the toughest parts is being disciplined and focused to attack your goals. What would you recommend to people to say, hey, I need to be better focused as far as outlining to achieve my goals? Is it prioritization of time? Is it a situation where, everybody has goals? They might be revenue goals, they might be personal goals, they might be professional goals, but how do I get myself into that position where I'm able to achieve those goals? Yeah.
So, the rhythm, the structure that I've found most effective is to, that at the bare minimum, we should be creating a series of annual goals. So 1-year goals. Any business needs to be operating off of a budget.
Yep.
And there's no reason you can't align your life this way too. Financial goals, maybe fitness goals, health goals, relationship goals, community goals. So you look at the year and then you break that down into quarters. And from there, you want to establish, and if you read Traction or, any of the models of the entrepreneurial operating system from Gino Wickman, I had the opportunity to work with him and design programs, based on his recommendations. When you look at this, you take the annual, you break it down into the 90-day or 100-day periods, your quarterly,
yep.
And you want to have 3 to 4 top priorities for what you're looking to accomplish in that area. Then take the time to distill that into the specific actions that you'll need to take month by month in order to create those results by the end of the quarter. Then you take those weekly actions or monthly actions, you start to look at them on a weekly basis. And then from that weekly basis, you look at them on a daily basis. This is just a very simple system for how we start to create high producing, people across the board. But having those goals posted, having them broadcasted, having them shared. There's a BYU study that found that people who declare their goals, state them out loud, have actions, have measurements around them, and check in with somebody on a regular basis, i.e. a coach or a manager or a mentor, become 95% likely to achieve their goals.
Wow, that's interesting. One of the things I've heard you've been talking about lately is, and I wanted you to see if you could share with our listeners, is the 5x5 20+1, and how it's impacting. Because I can tell you, I picked it up and I've been doing it a little bit daily. But I wanted you to share it with our audience a little bit, your philosophy behind it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and this is undoubtedly, out of anything that I've had the chance to share over the years, probably the thing that's had the most significant impact on people in their lives, across the board, not just from a professional development standpoint, but a personal development standpoint. I developed this when I was at Nexstar, a version of it, and we worked together on it, and it's gone everywhere with me. But the concept is that as soon as you wake up in the morning, to enter into a state of gratitude. Now, here's the thing I want to just say before we go into gratitude. Like, many people will kind of roll their eyes at the concept of gratitude. Okay. And then you have positive people that are like, oh, I love gratitudes. And you've got, realistic people that are like, whatever, that's for positive people. Here's the thing. Gratitude is the gateway to resilience. Okay. So every time we think a thought, we fire a neural pathway. The more often we fire that neural pathway, the more myelin, the more protein covers that neural pathway, the more available it becomes. So gratitude is firing neural pathways over and over to be able to see what's good and what's available around you. That's the definition of resilience. to be faced with an obstacle and still see what's good and what's available inside of that obstacle. And so the idea is not to become positive. It's to take your brain to the gym first thing in the morning and work your gratitude muscles so that when you get hit with, a friggin' pandemic, you don't crumble up and because look, I got to tell you, all these great leaders for the last 8 years or whatever, man, I watched 50% of them shrink the minute that COVID hit and say, we're just going to wait until this thing's over, or just pretend like it wasn't real. Those were the two ways of handling it, because they'd been cruising on calm seas and they weren't actively doing this work. So the first thing in the morning is to get up and list 5 gratitudes. And I mean small stuff. I mean the fact that you woke up in a clean bed, the fact that you have a hot shower waiting for you, the fact that you have that you have air conditioning and heating and all of these amazing things that we're living in the top 2% of all humans on earth with. So gratitude for what's around you, and write that down. Then you move into a list of 5 goals. And this is about thinking about this is the way I ask the question. What would I need to do today to live a day in the life of the man that I desire to be? So this isn't a checklist of like to-dos like we were talking about before.
Right.
This is like committing to calling my mom. This is like saying I'm going to make sure my wife laughs out loud 3 times today. This is saying that I'm going to hit my target for my nutrition today because I'm serious about my health and my well-being. This is saying I'm going to have a tough conversation that I've been putting off. So this is taking a real inventory of where you're at and saying, what are 5 things that I need to do today in order to live a day in the life of the man or woman I desire to be, that I aspire to be, not just who I was yesterday. And then the 20+1 is to engage in some sort of a physical activity, and it's 20 reps +1. And the +1 is the key to this thing. It's the idea that each day you would add 1 more than the day before. So if I do 20 push-ups to start, I'm going to do 21 tomorrow. I'm going to do 22 the next day, and so on. And man, you can play any game you want with this. You can just take it up to 30 and pick a different exercise, or you can see how far you can go. And I have had incredible experiences and amazing stuff that have actually transformed my health. But what's really amazing about it is the idea that every day, within the first 15 minutes of your day, you've identified gratitude. You've targeted the day that you're going to have from an aspirational standpoint of the man or woman you aspire to be. And you've started your day with a physical accomplishment. And of course, from a chemical standpoint, what we've done now is we've actually created our focus, our language, and our physiology. Tony Robbins talks about this, the triad of state. You've established a peak performance state. And that's what that morning routine is all about.
What is Keith working on right now to hit his goals that he hasn't done in the past?
So I've got a bunch of stuff. So the primary thing right now for me is I've transitioned over to something called they're called assumptive questions, and I can get them for you. Hold on, I'll get them for you. So the premise behind this is, to again, this is working. All of the personal development work I've ever done, every time that I talk to these top performers, what we find, these coaches, these extraordinary coaches, is that leveraging the non-conscious is where all your power comes from. Everybody's trying to think their way through stuff, and it's the weakest portion of the brain, the lowest power portion of the brain. The non-conscious operates our beliefs. It operates everything in the background. Every decision is made for us before our conscious mind even gets involved. So the idea is that through asking these empowering questions, we're creating this space where we're just asking the non-conscious to find opportunities. So here are my 3 right now. As a loving, honoring, and devoted husband, how will I instill faith, trust, and passion into my marriage today? As a disciplined, courageous, and independent entrepreneur, how will I move my business, my message, and my service to others forward today? As a kind, loving, patient son and brother, how will I enrich, engage, and enhance my relationships today? And so I ask these questions every morning, with the no intent to answer them. The answer is out there. The answer's in here. It'll come. But this is just creating and enlivening my awareness and my focus. And so that's what I'm working on, man. Those are the 3 areas that I need the most work, and that's where I'm most committed to the work.
And not one of them has more of a priority than the other.
No, number 1, me,
All right.
husband. Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Yeah, that's my number 1 priority right now.
All right. That's good
Yeah.
stuff. Well, we truly appreciate the time that you've given us to share our listeners a little bit about who Keith is and what Keith's up to, and what's made you successful in your career. And I feel compelled to tell you we truly appreciate the time that you have. So one of the things that we get to do here on the Lion's Den is the final roar. And so what we'd like you to do is to push. So when we push it out to our listeners, is one final thought about being better at leadership, your teams, and yourself, and how you can give that message to them of what they should do.
All right. And I didn't know this was a question, but the answer is actually really, really clear right now, because if you look out behind me, you see the city of Minneapolis behind me, and I've just been bearing witness to some pretty extraordinary stuff over the past few days with the riots and everything that's been taking place in regard to the death of George Floyd. And if you look on social media, what has become the culture of our country is a culture that talks a lot about what others need to do. It's a culture that talks a lot about telling people what they need to do. And what I'm finding is that the influence that I have created in my life, when all these people that I've been given the privilege to speak in front of and to train alongside, that the thing that compels them the most is when I share with them what I'm learning. And in order to learn something, I have to wake up every day with a commitment to being wrong. And what I'm sharing with you is that rightness is the most addictive substance on earth. And if you're right about your current set of beliefs, your current series of behaviors, if you're right about it, then I want you to get this, then you've peaked. Then today is the best you'll have ever been. So unless you can find out what you were wrong about today, you have no space for growth. And so I'm asking people to start listening and start asking, and genuinely listening and genuinely asking, with the courage to be influenced to find out what they were wrong about. And my God, does the world need this right now, man.
Well, listen, like I said, I couldn't be more thrilled to have you as my first guest speaker here in the Lion's Den. And listen, I wish you nothing but the best in your new career at Radiant, as well as the other entrepreneurial things that you have. And hopefully that you're hitting those other 3 conscious goals of being the best husband you can be, being the best entrepreneur you can be, and being the best brother and father that you can be to your kids. So
brother and son. Yeah, Bill. So this was your first interview?
Yeah.
Hey, congratulations, man. You did great.
Thanks.
Really well done. Listen, it means a lot to me. The most generous thing somebody can do is to listen. And so the fact that you did that today, and that whoever is out there that made it all the way to this point in this conversation, tremendous gratitude. Thank you for lending your audience. It really means a lot.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to follow me at Lance Bachman on Instagram and Twitter. Follow me on Facebook at Lance Bachman Digital. And every Thursday we drop a new podcast. Don't forget to listen to it. We're giving out great content. And remember this is the time to build your business right now. Let's effing go, everybody.